Hey, this is Kieron, Coaches Corner Chats, and on the podcast, I have Josh Rife. Josh, where are you at, and what are you up to?
Yeah, Muncie. So Muncie, Indiana, head coach at Ball State University. So I can just say, or head soccer coach. No men's program here, so get to coach the ladies, and just finished up my third season. So it'll be, July will actually be 3 years here in Muncie. So loved every second.
When you started Muncie 3 years ago what were some of the things that you wanted to put in place that you were hoping to be at where you're at now after 3 seasons?
Yeah, I think the team, one of the really great things for me when I took over was the program had been successful. And so I think it was not so much reinventing the wheel by any means. It was kind of taking what do they do well and how can we kind of just continue to build on it, right? I think anything as successful as, one season can be, if you kind of remain the same, you're going to get caught, or you're going to get passed, or, people are going to continue, to close that gap. And so I think one of the things is, I found throughout my career is just however successful you've been, and it's great and exciting, is that you better be ready to get back after it, the following day, because, no one else is taking time off, and they're not going to, they'll sing your praises for a very short time before they're coming after you again.
You mentioned no men's program. Are there advantages and disadvantages to not having a men's program at the university?
Yeah, I'll hit the disadvantages first. I think that when you have a men's team, I think there becomes a natural kind of fan section, what we'll call it, right? I mean, like you just have some, another team that has a like interest. And so I think you get natural support that they're going to come out and support you. Your ladies are going to go support them. So you get this built-in soccer community, which is great among the athletes. I think, again, it's different on both sides. It's not good or bad. I've coached on both the men's side and the women's side, but I think they bring different elements, right? I mean, I think that there's a level, just the speed of play in general on the men's side is pretty quick, right? And it's a generalization, but I would just say in my experience, like the guys will watch games all day long, right? Like they're playing FIFA in the locker rooms, they're playing FIFA in the dorms. Like they're just, if there's a game on, it doesn't matter what it is, they're probably watching it, right? Like where our girls, they will watch games, but I think sometimes it's reminders, they're watching national team games, right? But it's not every weekend or, shoot, I have a hard enough time doing it, but they're not checking Champions League schedules, and they're not watching midweek games. And so I think on the men's side, like, just like I grew up in the era of Michael Jordan, right? Like everyone to be like Mike, right? So you're watching the game and you're trying to but like same thing on the field, right? These guys are seeing players day in, day out do stuff. And it's like they're trying things, right? And they're doing things. And that becomes probably the most natural, consistent exposure that a team, women's team will get, is watching the men play. They're like, oh, wow, well, look at that. I didn't see this, or like how, some of those things. I think though, it's a different type of tactics, but I think, on the women's side, just how, I think a certain level of structure and spacing, how like it can be, you can exploit things differently in the women's game, right? I mean, I think it's harder to get one-on-one matchups, right? Or I think it becomes a little more difficult on the men's side. On the women's side, like I think you can be a little more intentional, like, hey, where can we be successful? And like, let's get the ball there, right? I mean, I just think, if the pitch is the same size, I think it just becomes a little bit harder sometimes for the women to cover as much ground. So if your spacing is really good, you can create, 1v1 matchups better, right? Or with more success maybe than on the men's side. So it's little nuances of that. I think it's kind of the downside of maybe why of not having a men's team, is we don't get to see, just differences in people playing, and for our kids to take those ideas and say, hey, let's do that, right? Or we solve this. As a coach, it's a whole nother staff that you get to bounce ideas off of. I think at places that I've been that have had men's programs, there's again, built in 3 or 4 other staff that you're just talking the game with, and you're talking to them about, hey, how'd this go in training? What about this? Have you tried this? Or, hey, how do you guys solve these problems, right? So I think that's personally, right, that's a little bit of a, something that you miss. On the positive side, and this is it's extremely selfish, but like, I don't have to check with anybody to use my field, right? Like we're the only one for training. If we want to do something, it's like, well, okay, yeah. If we're not using it, then it's available. So I think that there's definitely, there's a convenience factor. And, I think just everybody's schedule is busy enough as it is that when you're not having to schedule another team, and, you want to be as amicable as you can in that relationship. So it's just a little more balance of who's where, doing what, can we do this? And, weather hits and you got to change. Again, like I said, it's pretty convenient for me to just be like, hey guys, we're going to push training back an hour, right? Like no big deal. Or, other places I've been, it's like, well, we want to push it back an hour. Well, that's creeping into their time. You got to call them. Does this work? So it's a slight inconvenience more than it's, I guess, a huge benefit, but I'd say that's the biggest differences.
You mentioned with not having another staff to bounce ideas off, how do you fill that void? Like, who do you bounce ideas off of?
Yeah. Well, I'll start number one. I'm the second best player in my house. So my wife was a Division I women's soccer player. She's in the Hall of Fame at her university. I'll never be in the Hall of Fame anywhere. And so she was a Division I assistant coach as well. So I think there's a natural, sounding board right there of all things, right? Whether it's soccer, whether it's just dealing with issues that come up with the team. She obviously lends an amazing perspective for me. My brother-in-law was an All-American soccer player at Wake Forest. So there's that built in. My sister was a Division I soccer player. So within my family, I got a lot of people with opinions, that's for sure. And then, but yeah, I mean, again, you kind of stay around the game long enough, you meet different coaches. My first break into the women's college soccer was with a guy named Nate Norman, who's the head coach at Notre Dame. Women's coach at Notre Dame is a close friend of mine, so we talk a lot of soccer. I've been really, really fortunate to have, through my playing career, to be under some pretty amazing coaches that, I can either reach out to them or even just draw back on past experiences of these guys who have had unbelievable, success. Whether it's Jerry Yeagley at Indiana, where I was fortunate enough to play under him. I like to say the Coach Yeagley, the original. Through my pro career with a coach who was a Hall of Fame coach, played indoor as well with a guy, Keith Tozer, who, I think when I was there on the field for his 700th win, I think he's the all-time winningest pro coach in North America. Guy Bob Lilly, who's with the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, but has won, with the Vancouver Whitecaps and in Montreal and with the Rochester Rhinos. So, I think I've been really fortunate. And Vladko Andonovski, our new women's national team coach, is a former teammate of mine. So during COVID, we had a number of conversations, and so I guess you live long enough, you kind of meet enough people that move on to do big things that you get to, just kind of bounce ideas off of them and just learn from them, just watch them and see how they do things. I think it's, so I don't know. I've been really fortunate, kind of feel like Forrest Gump at times, that I kind of fall into some of these situations and just run across these people. And I'm like, how did I get here? But really fortunate, like I said, to have some pretty great mentors along the way and just friends really that I can lean on with different things.
Was your time at Indiana, was that kind of the spur that said, you know what, if the playing thing doesn't work out, I'd love to get into coaching?
No, actually. So my dad's a contractor, home builder, blue collar guy. The plan was, get through college and go take over the family business. Grew up around it, enjoy kind of process driven type work, right? I mean, you start here and home gets built down here, and you get the steps in between and how you go about it. I was fortunate enough to had an 11-year pro career playing. So I actually got a late start into coaching. But as I was looking to retire, one of the indoor teams, so I played indoor and outdoor professionally, but one of the indoor teams that I played against said, hey, we're looking for a new coach. Would you be interested? And I was 32 years old, I guess, at the time. Someone said, hey, you want to be a pro coach? And I was like, sure, like I can kind of push off some of the family business stuff another year. And I got into that, and the indoor soccer towards the, it has its ups and downs as far as stability at the time. And it was a little bit of a rough patch, been a little uncertainty. And with a young family, I knew I needed to make a move from there, but definitely loved coaching. I mean, that's where I really kind of said, you know what, I like this a lot more than I thought I was going to. And, I want to keep doing this. And now it's like, all right, well, what's the right situation? Where's the right opportunity for me? And, fortunately, again, with my wife and her background and the game, she was like, yeah, let's do it. She was gung ho and was like, yeah, let's see where this goes. And, and credit to her that, again, she gave me the freedom to say, let's go chase this down a little bit.
How that's so cool. What your wife, her response to it was, how impactful and supportive and what have you has she been to be that kind of to take a step back? I mean, being a stud soccer player as she was and what have you, to kind of take that step back and kind of push you out there as like, hey, now it's your time to go and make your own waves.
Man, it'll sound cliche, but I can't overstate how amazing my wife has been through this. So this is 17 years, March 26th was 17 years married. We've moved 30 times in that time. And, you can't, I have teammates that I feel like they kind of go one of two ways. They either married someone who's a soccer player and loved it, or they married someone who knew nothing about the game. And, my wife's talking to them at games and they're like, oh, like the uniforms look cool, right? My wife, I come home and my wife is like, your first touch was terrible. Like, you need to work on that this week, right? But no, she has been unbelievably supportive. And it's great, right? Because then you feel like, because again, there's a lot of sacrifices that you make in this, especially, right, college coaching and the amount of recruiting and games and just the demands of it, right? That so much falls on her. If she wasn't supportive, there's no way it would work, right? That, part of this is maybe falls on me with scheduling, but you only have so many dates in the spring, right? We had a spring game on my anniversary, right? It's like, hey, hun, sorry, we're gonna be on the road in Dayton. I'll be back home. I've got a daughter who's got a birthday in September in the middle of the season, right? Like you're gonna miss or be late for certain things. And so, no, to have a family who is supportive is one thing, but to have a wife who was a college coach, right? Division I assistant coach, like she gets it, she understands it, but she loves it. We kind of joke that I don't know if there's a house in America that watches more soccer than we do. And it's usually driven by my wife, that she's the one texting me updates on Champions League scores, or, we've got two computers and a TV on, and they're all, in the fall with college games, and we're watching everything we can. And I'm trying to scout one game and she's watching something else, and she's watching another future opponent. She's like, oh, did you know so-and-so? I was like, no, I'm today's Thursday. I don't even know what I'm doing tomorrow. But I'm like, sure, if you want to scout for 4 games ahead, like, go for it, So it's a lot of fun though. And I think, my kids don't know it yet, but they're going to be soccer players. So that's
that's a given. Hey, the other thing that popped in my head was you talked about getting asked to take over that professional team and you enjoyed the coaching. What was the transition like from being the player to being, now I'm coach? What was that like?
Yeah, again, I was really fortunate. So between indoor, outdoor, it was 19 pro seasons. I was good being done playing, right? Like I wasn't that coach who had the itch to keep doing it, right? We joke about a lot, like, around people ask me if I still play. I'm like, no, like I don't. I had my run. Physically, it's probably harder on me than I'd like to admit some days. So I didn't miss playing, but I missed the locker room. I missed kind of just the energy around the game. So the transition into coaching was easy. Now I think trying to find my way as a coach was pretty, was the most difficult thing, right? I had a lot of ideas. I think, it's one of those things with the game, even from a young age, I always tell people, like, the game made sense to me, right? I grew up in Texas, football's king, right? Like, it's football season and football off season, but I was never going to be a football player. I was 5'2" and 96 pounds my freshman year in high school. So I was just a little guy. But the game of soccer just always made sense, right? And so I think the way and I had to think the game to keep up, right? Like there's no way physically I was gonna get by in the game. So it was, just how do I understand the game, and just tactically, right? I guess I would say that it was pretty natural for me. So I think the ideas I had, but as far as then like how to actually be a coach, the best and worst thing for me was that I had these pretty unbelievable coaches that I played for, right? The blessing is that you see these pretty amazing people day in and day out that are, at Indiana with Coach Yeagley, right? I think he's an 8-time National Coach of the Year. Again, was on the field when he won his 500th game. Just we were in the middle of 5 straight Final Four appearances when I was there. Well, the natural thing then is you want to say, well, let me just do what Coach Yeagley does, right? When I was coaching indoor, right? Guy Keith Tozer, who's won a bunch, right? And was fortunate to be on some teams that were really successful. It's like, well, let me just do what Keith Tozer does. And the reality is, like, I'm a terrible Keith Tozer. I'm a terrible Jerry Yeagley. I'm a terrible Mark Steffens, Bob, if I'm trying to be somebody else, like that was probably the hardest part. Like I knew I loved coaching, but there were definitely days where I'm like, man, like this is hard. Like this is not, and not that it's always going to be easy, but it was a hard lesson early on of like, I'm a terrible fill in the blank, right? My only hope at doing this is to try to be the best Josh Rife I can be. And I think that was a more liberating moment for me as a coach to just say like, all right, I've just got to forge ahead with taking these lessons, but like, how do I do it my way?
What was the conversation like with Dad when you realized like professional soccer and now I'm going into coaching, I'm not going into the family business? What was the dynamic there between the two of you?
Yeah, he's got to be my biggest fan, right? So I think it was a thing of where I kind of thought I was going to go back and do this. And he finally just got to the point. He's like, look, like, if you don't want to do this, like, that's okay. He's like, I'm going to be okay with that. Like, you need to go do what you want to do. And that even happened as a player. I was fortunate enough to go overseas, and we talked a little earlier before we kind of kicked this off. Spent some time in Newcastle in between my junior and senior in college, and went over with a team and played, and was identified by a scout there. And so I went back after I left school early, went over to Scotland and was on trial with Celtic and St. Mirren, and, had some great experiences, and really some stubbornness on my end and some pride. Like I just quit. So like I went over there, had some opportunities to go back, and I just quit. And that was we'll call it I don't know if it was a fight, but the only time I've ever hung up with my dad, and I said, hey, I'm not going to play. And he wasn't too happy to hear that. And I just hung the phone up on him. We didn't talk for almost 6 months, which it's a guy that I talk to 2-3 times a week. But the short of it was, he's just like, you're wasting an opportunity. He's like, you have a talent. He goes, you should play. Yeah, I mean, that was his thing. He was just like, what are you doing? And he just thought I was the biggest idiot for not pursuing it. I wasn't happy that he had that opinion. And so we took some time off. But again, kind of through that time was when I realized, like, you know what, I do try to impress upon my players, but I think my mom, love her. She can do a lot of amazing things. She was never going to be a soccer player. She's 4'10". She's tiny, not an overly competitive person. It was like, man, my mom's gifted in a lot of different things, but soccer's not one of them. And that realization, like, you know what, I do have a knack for this game, and it's kind of wasteful of me to not take advantage of the opportunities. And fortunately, I was, I had the opportunity to go back, and this was back in the A-League, pre-USL, or kind of before however many versions and branding, but they used to draft players. And so a team out of Charlotte had drafted me, and I told them no thanks at the time, and then kind of came crawling back and said, hey, can I come back for a tryout? And spent 10 years there after that, and was fortunate enough. And so yeah, my dad, he was super supportive. I think one of the biggest things that I don't do well with it, he's been amazing, but sometimes I think I feel I've gotten better at it, but want to press upon my kids is just this, like, why not mentality, right? Like, and even with our players, right? Like, go try this. Well, coach, what happens if, like, well, like, why wouldn't you try it? Just try it. Why not? Like, what's the worst that can happen? And he's always, he's an entrepreneur and kind of has that spirit in him anyway. But, I think with the coaching gig, he was kind of like, why not? Right? Like, okay, well, let's just say you're terrible and it sucks. Like, okay, well, 32 years old, you were the head coach of a pro soccer team. Like, that doesn't sound like that's the worst case scenario, you know? So yeah, he's always been a big fan and supportive of me kind of chasing down my passions.
As you finish up the pro opportunity and realize, man, this coaching thing is pretty cool, I'd like to keep pursuing it, where do you go next? What's the next step in the journey?
Yeah, so I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with the assistant coach of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds at the time. So I left Rochester, went to Pittsburgh, and my old coach in Charlotte was the head coach there. You know, we're about 9 games into the season. Was not, we weren't having a great year, and I get a call from Nate Norman, who I had never met before, but he had a teammate at Notre Dame that I was teammates with in Charlotte, and he was looking for an assistant, and he called and said, hey, you know, would you be interested? And at the time, you know, I had a job. I'm like, well, you know, not sure. I knew it was a good opportunity. You know, the pro game can be a little tumultuous at times and uncertain. And we had a really great conversation. 48 hours later, my head coach was let go. And I thought, you know, maybe this is really good timing to make the move. And so fortunately, you know, it worked out well. And I was fortunate to be retained by the new coach that came in. But at that time, you know, my wife and I said, you know what, let's make this move. And we had talked about going on the women's side with her background in playing. I have 2 daughters. And so I think, you know, women's soccer was something we, you know, collegiately is something we had looked at wanting to get into or getting back to, really, I guess. And who knew if the opportunity ever arise for us to work together, right? And so the Liberty job was presented as an assistant there with Nate, and we took it, and that was kind of my first full-time gig, collegiate women's soccer.
When you looked back at that first, now with the women's side, it's collegiate, you've been kind of entrenched in the professional game. What were some of the things that you realized when you got into the college game that were a little bit different than the professional game?
Yeah, I think it sets up to my kind of personality probably better, but I think that on the women's side, for sure, they're a little more relational, right? I think on the men's side, especially pro, we joke about it, but you're kind of working with mercenaries, right? Like highest bidder, like, yeah, we'll go to battle with whoever pays us the most, which isn't bad, right? I mean, I think, again, so much of anything you get into, it's like, what are the expectations? Let's just be really clear about it. It's like, well, hey, you know, on the pro side, it's a business, right? Like, you're being paid and expected to perform at a certain level and do certain things. And if you can do that, great, we'll get along. And if not, then, you know, it's a little more transactional, maybe, is what I would say. You can still have some transformational moments as a coach. I think it's just different, right? You know, I think so. Again, on the women's side, I think, well, we'll go back to the men's, right? The men's, my playing pedigree and background helped earn me credit with the players, right? Like, if you go out there and you hit you go ping a ball and they're like, oh, okay, like coach played, he knows what he's talking about, right? Like, I think you earn credibility a little different there on the women's side. Like, you know, 3 years into this, and one of my players was like, oh, you coach professionally? And I was like, yeah, you know. She's like, oh, I didn't know that, right? Like, they could care less what I've done as a player, right? But they're gonna want to know, like, do you care, right? Like, do you care about me as a person? Are you invested in me? And I think when you cross that bridge, then I think, like, you know, they're willing to, you know, their buy-in, I think, grows exponentially there, right? But again, it's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. That they'll sift through the, you know, kind of the fake facade if it's not real. So, yeah.
Was there part of you when at Liberty, what point did you say, you know what, I want to go become a head coach? Like, was that kind of the fire, the spark that you needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like I said, I got into it late, so for a lot of people, right? I mean, that was then 34 years old before I was my first full-time, you know, collegiate coaching gig, which is, I know I'm fortunate, right? I mean, I have different experiences, but it's not typical, all right? But I knew with a family, and while I loved my time as assistant for everyone I worked for, I also knew, like, you know, with being a head coach, there's different pressure, but there's also different benefits that I get to set the schedule, right? Like, you know, I can't always do it, but there's a lot of moments where if there's a field trip and I want to take my kid to the apple orchard, you know, like, hey, I can move the schedule around to go do that, right? Like, you know, so, you know, I think that was always a pull, right? Is that one day, you know, you want to get there. You know, again, I was fortunate along the way that every head coach I worked with, they valued the, you know, the family, and there weren't many times where I felt like I had to choose between the two, that they were always really respectful of kind of my family and trying to keep that balance. But like I said, we'll go back to earlier, just when you have a wife who understands it and loves it as much as you, that helps, because there's probably times where the balance wasn't there, but she was cool with it and she understood, and you know, I never felt guilty in those moments.
So then Liberty, crush it there. Is that the next move to Muncie, or is there another stop along the way?
So yeah, I was at Liberty for 2 years under two different head coaches. So I was retained there. Went to Mississippi State was kind of the next move for me, and was an assistant there at Mississippi State in the SEC for Tom and Agnes, and who Tom, you know, Nate was an assistant for Tom at Miami back in the day, and so made that connection, and so was offered that opportunity. And kind of the trend at that time was a lot of Power 5 assistants were becoming head coaches, and so you know, I think that was, looking at it, it was, you know, somewhat of a calculated risk on our end of like, hey, is this the right time to make this move? And so yeah, so we capitalized on that opportunity, spent 11 months actually at Mississippi State when I got a call about you know, about the position there. And so within 3 years of going full-time college coaching, I was in a position to be the head coach of a Division I program, which, so I mentioned Forrest Gump earlier, right? Like, I mean, there's no way you could have predicted that and said, you know, hey, this is how the trajectory, because that's just not necessarily how it went. Our athletic director here, Beth Getz, she's a former Division I women's soccer player herself. She played at Clemson, was a college coach for 10 years at the Division II level, or 9 years before she went to full-time administration. And so, you know, she looked at my playing experience and maybe even on the pro side, you know, and didn't look at it as a detriment, right? I mean, like, she saw the value in that and understood that, where, not that it's a problem one way or the other, but I don't know if every athletic director views it that way, right? And so again, I was really fortunate to walk into a situation with somebody who could look at my path to get there and say, yeah, you know what, like, there's value in this. Yeah, it's not the typical 10 years as an assistant, you know, working your way up, but she said, you know, there's still some value to what experience you have, and, you know, was willing to give me a chance.
How exciting is it for you to now be heading into year 4, when it sounds like your experience so far college-wise has been 2 years here, the 11 months at Mississippi State? Like, you know, now you're actually going to see this 4th year, you will see some of those freshmen are now going to be seniors, and you're going to start seeing that first wave go through. How cool is it for you to kind of be able to sit back and continually, in a way, build a program?
Yeah, oh, it's exciting, right? Again, love our players, right? I mean, I've loved and enjoyed every single one that I've had a chance to work with, but this will be the first, so this upcoming fall will be the first class that's, you know, we'll call it my recruiting class, that, you know, previous classes have come through before. You know, there were commitments that were already made, that we honored those commitments, and happily, right? I mean, I love those kids, but they, you know, they didn't go through the recruiting process with you know, with me and my staff, you know, and the staff, like, it's, and we've even had some staff turnover. So it's, you know, even some of these kids that commit under different assistant coaches, but yeah, I mean, it's really exciting, you know, because I think now just every piece of it, right? Like, you know, you're finding players who can fit your style and are willing to make adjustments, you know, but even just what they signed up for, right? I mean, there were some times in the early days where, you know, the kids, you having to just say, like, look, I get it, you didn't sign up for this, right? Like, you're stuck with me at this point, unfortunately, right? But, and I'm going to do things a little different, which, you know, not that the previous staff was wrong in whatever they did, it's different, right? And so kids, you know, came in expecting one thing, and maybe, you know, as I said, you're expecting one thing, you got me, you know, that I think at least now moving forward, right, with this incoming class, that, hey, these are the kids that we've been through this process together, that, you know, at least initially, I would say, just values are a little more aligned.
What has that been like? Because you used to be the assistant who was kind of moving on to other things. What has it been like to be as a head coach and have kind of a change of the guard as your assistants?
Yeah, no, look, I think one of the exciting things and toughest things about being at a mid-major, right, that I hope, right, and if I'm doing my job well, if we as a staff are doing our job well, like, I want to find really highly ambitious people who want to continue to grow in their career. And if that means that they've got to be here for a short stint, 1 season, 2 seasons, like, that's okay. I guess, I think that there's definitely something to be said for some consistency in staff, right? I mean, you can't underestimate that. But I also think that, I want people who are, hopefully, right? And I think we've done a great job of finding people who are really good at what they do. And if they're really good at what they do, then, I kind of tell them, I'm like, I hope you're not an assistant coach at Ball State for 15 years with me, right? I might think I'm pretty great, but I want them to, I want them to go and reach whatever their dreams are. And the college coaching world is so unpredictable that you can't predict when a job comes open, when someone decides you see so much of it now, people retiring, getting out of it, and all of a sudden it's, I think, I don't know if it was 7 or 8 Power 5 jobs have turned over in this past cycle, which is kind of nuts that, at one point in time you had, I think it was, UCLA, USC, and Georgia Kentucky were all open at one time, right? Like, these are, big time names in college athletics that are, so that being said too, that as much as you might say, hey, I'd love for you to be here for 2 years, well, if their dream job opens 6 months later, like, then they need to go for it, right? And I'm not gonna be, hurt because of that. Again, part of it, my job is, when they come as well, is hopefully entrusting me to help them grow in their career, whether that's, hopefully individually, that I can be I hate to say mentor, because I don't feel like I'm old enough to be necessarily that, but like, just help them grow, right? Like, hey, how can I help? That's one of the questions I ask when, in interviewing, is like, how do you feel I can help you, right? Like, or what do you feel like you need, where do you want to get better at? And, I'll tell them if I don't think I can help them, they're like, I'll be honest with them, like, hey, that's great, that might not be how I can help you, but if it's something that we can, then great, like, come on, and we'll give you those responsibilities. We'll talk about those things, we'll help you, continue to develop and grow as a coach, and let's go get you wherever the dream job is. Like, let's go get that for you.
You've mentioned the Forrest Gump kind of metaphor. How big of a impact has that been on you as a coach where you're at? I mean, you've got Hall of Famer at Indiana. You got the other coach that you got to go with, and he's winning 700 plus wins, to all of these little stops along the way. I mean, are you filling up a notebook of ideas? Are you just constantly soaking things up as a sponge? I mean, how big were all those little, even 11 months at a Power 5 at Mississippi State, I'm sure had to be hugely impactful as you made the transition to Ball State. So what were some of the things that you kind of latched onto and said, because a lot of people say, how does he keep Indiana a perennial power year in, year out? The guy's been there forever. How does he do it? And then the same thing, when you win 700 games, that's not just always having great talent. There's a lot of coaching that goes into that as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned, and our players probably hate this a little bit, but honestly, every stop along the way with these coaches that I've had the chance of working with, it's really interesting. Like, they are not, they're obviously brilliant coaches, but Coach Yeagley, he was such a superstitious guy that if you won a game, like, whatever we did at training that week, we were going to do the same exact thing the very next week. Well, down to the same pennies. Like, he's going to wear the same thing to a game, right? Now, fortunately, because pretty successful, that means that we didn't have a lot of variety in training sessions, right? But that's true along the step every way. I mean, I think that trying to explain, and it's hard, you have to be really okay with being boring in a sense, right? We didn't it was hey, here's what we're doing, and we're going to be really good at these 3 things, right? Great, then just be good at that, right? When I was in Charlotte, we went to 4 straight finals there, right? And it was we weren't, it wasn't this it's a selling it short to say there weren't tactical things in it, right? But it was like, hey, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be, and like we're just going to be really good at this and try to be this, right? Now obviously you got to have your tactics have to start from a good spot. You have to have talented players, right? But I think you also, from the player standpoint, like you got to be okay with just routine and like process driven, right? Like, all right, like if we're doing patterns, unopposed patterns again today, like, well, how do we get really good at that? I mean, that's one of the hardest things to get players to do is you're doing unopposed patterns, tactical stuff, and like it can break down so quick. But man, the good teams, like they can appreciate the mundaneness, I think that's a word, right? Of like those type of things, right? Like, you know, again, in Charlotte, we had like 6 different passing warm-ups that we would do, right? I mean, I can do them in my sleep, but I love them. Like, that's what I missed as a player. That's what I miss as a player is not, yes, games were fun. You know, you love winning those. Championships are awesome to win those. Been, you know, fortunate to have some of those, but like I miss passing patterns, right? I just miss getting touches and like just the challenge of can we be perfect here, right? Like if we can't be perfect here, we can't expect to be good anywhere else, right? I mean, it's like, again, it's an unopposed passing pattern, right? Can every pass be clean? Can every pass be to the right foot, the right pace? You know, like I had a coach, remember, just said like, got to give a gift, right? Like when I give a pass to somebody, am I giving a gift that they have no choice but to like make a really good pass because I've given them like a gift that, you know, if they screw this up, that I'm going to give them some banter and be like, what do you know, like, sorry, I played it to your foot. Like, I don't really, what else do you want me to do? You know, so I think like that's one of the bigger things that every coach had some things that were a little different about him. Coach Yeggs was an unbelievable, we'll call it manager, right? I mean, like he's getting the top talent in the country year in and year out, and he manages to make them work as a team, right? Where, you know, it's one thing to say like, hey, everyone's a good player when they get to college, because they are, right? But now you're talking about like you're getting national team kids, you're getting the elite of the elite to buy in every year, right? Just his management of people was unbelievable, right? Mark Steffens, who I got to play for in Charlotte and then coach alongside in Pittsburgh. Like, I don't know of a coach who cares about his players more than him. He didn't have really a full-time staff when I was playing, so I was a captain, and me and the other captain, we spent a lot of time with him talking through just, you know, lineup stuff, and he would, you know, he entrusted us a lot in asking these questions, but he was somewhat of a insomniac and didn't sleep a lot, you know, and I just remember asking him when I said, Coach, what do you do? It's like 2 a.m. and you're awake, and I'll never forget this. He just goes, he goes, I just pray for the team. He goes, I go through the lineup from the back forward. He goes, I just pray for the team. And I'm like, who does that? I'm like, this is a guy who, again, like is a Hall of Fame coach in the USL. And like, he's telling me that when he can't sleep, like he's not trying to go back to sleep. He's like, all right, you know, like the level of care, I'm gonna pray for my players, right? Like the level of care that he had, you know, for every kid that came through that team, whether they played a minute, every minute, whatever it was, like always just stuck with me. You know, I'm like, golly, how selfish am I as a player, right? As a person, like I'm not thinking about other people that much as I'd like to think I care about other people. I'm like, I'm not even close, you know? Keith Tozer, right? Just, I think the guy, right, wins 700 games, but is continually just trying to get better, right? I mean, every year we would be, you know, maybe trying a few different things, and he loved the game of futsal. And so it's like, hey, how do I take this game of futsal and incorporate it in indoor soccer? And, you know, like his just motivation and drive every day showing up. And, you know, he told me when I got my first, you know, the first job coaching indoor, and I said, you know, you got any advice? And he just said 3 things: teach, teach, teach. He's like, just continually teach, you know, like it's just your job as a coach, you know. Bob Lilly, you know, again, another guy who has won everywhere along the way. Like he had, people talk about like you have a picture in your mind. He had the most detailed picture, right, of how he thought the game needed to be played and how he wanted to do things. And as a player, sometimes it was frustrating because you'd stop, you know, I mean, he would stop a passing pattern every 15 seconds if he felt like it needed to be done, and you're just like, you just want to get in the rhythm, but it's like, no, like this ball needs to be here, right? I mean, it's like a matter of like 6 inches, but he's like, no, like the ball needs to be here to this foot right here so they can play this, right? There's always a why behind it, but it was like the detail with which he would go about it was frustrating as a player at times, but it was like, you know, he's the boss and this is what he wants. And it's like, all right, well, as I said, the mercenary piece, right? It's like, we're paid to do a job. Like, all right, like, let me do my job as best as I can to what he's trying to get, right? Regardless of, doesn't matter if I think it's right. So it's what he wants. So like, okay, like, let's do it. Excuse me. And so I think, yeah, again, I look at these different people, I think even, Nate Norman, right, at Notre Dame now, like he had such a great balance, I think, of kind of all those things, like tactically and understanding how much is enough and how much is too much for these kids. And, I think, just kind of the basics of like, we don't need to overcomplicate this too much, right? Like we can, it's a similar theme, but I think, his ability to kind of combine, I think all those traits was great. Tom and Agnes at Mississippi State, he was relentless, is what I would say, a relentless pursuit of excellence. We kind of would joke that he needs to get a hobby because he doesn't have any, but part of it though is like he's watching film all the time. Just digesting film all the time, and the little nuances and understanding like, hey, these are little things that we can pick up on, and like, let's make sure we're prepared for this, or this player does this really well. So I think learning from him this insatiable appetite for just consuming film, right? Like there's just no substitute from just, the more you watch a team play, you pick up on things and you're like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm sure, I know our team has them, right? But every team has tendencies. And so it's like, how do we counteract these things, or how do we prepare for it? Because the game's won and lost in moments, right? It's just one moment here, one moment there. And so it's like, well, who knows if this little piece of information is going to be the difference in us converting in a moment, or defending a moment really well. That every bubble team, every season, I promise you can boil it down to 2 or 3 possessions of like, man, if we would have scored in this moment, or if we didn't give up a goal here, that flips the season. And all of a sudden now we're in the tournament, we win a game, we don't lose a game, right? Like, there's so many minutes that are played in a season that, yes, it's a collective work, but you can go back and look in every game, there's 1 or 2 moments probably that are really where the game hinges. And so, that level of detail, I think, is really important to be mindful of. Just gave you a lot there, sorry.
That was awesome. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. The other thing I wanted just to finally kind of touch on is, here you are at Ball State, and you talked about like you don't want assistants to be there for 15 years and what have you. Is there part of you, and even maybe in your wife's hope, that maybe you do move on to a larger, maybe a Power 5 D1 school? Is that something, or are you kind of at this point like, hey, at this point my Forrest Gump trip has taken me and things have just opened up, or I've got a phone call, and if it happens, I'll look at it, but right now let me focus on Ball State, crush it here, keep building something great?
Yeah, so I kind of touched a little bit on this, right? But I'm a faith-driven guy, and I do think that I don't believe too much in coincidence, right? I do believe that you got hard work and you got to do your job where you're at, and I think that when you do that, hopefully things will open. I joke about the Force, but I could not have scripted where I'm at, where I've been through, even youth playing, and these different opportunities I've had. Like, you can't script that, right? And I couldn't have predicted it. And so I think I can say this 100% that I love being here at Ball State, right? I think there's just a lot of things that are great about it. The drawbacks being I'm not close to family anywhere. My wife's from North Carolina, I'm from Texas, but there have been things that have come up, and even we look at it, we're like, I don't know if it's worth going, right? That we do enjoy it here. So I'm sure, well, hopefully, I don't know, right? If opportunities come up, again, in our industry, you always take a phone call, right? That's a little bit of my dad there, right? Hey, always take the call. Like, again, what's the worst that can happen in the phone call? So it's too hard to predict the future. I can tell you that we are extremely, happy here. I think if opportunities come up and, we feel like it's, the right opportunity for our family, then yeah, right. Like we'll take it. But right now we've been really, really happy, really fortunate to be where we're at.
That is an awesome way to end this chat. This is Kieron with Coach's Corner Chats with Josh Rife, and I'm out. Peace.